6. Forest fires are fast becoming an important area of concern in India. Elaborate on the impact on local ecology. What factors are contributing to these forest fires? What measures are taken to prevent them? Hints: the wildfire or forest fire is an uncontrolled fire that is wiping out large fields and areas of land. Frequency of forest fires have drastically increased in the last few years, partly because of environmental factors, especially climate change and other man-made intentional activities. The number has touched 24,817 in 2016, a really alarming rise from around 15,937 fires in 2015, says the report by Parliamentary Standing Committee on Science and Technology. The committee has suggested a national policy on managing forest fires. Fire has long been an integral part of the forest environment and has played an important role in shaping the flora and fauna. The fire may be either beneficial or detrimental to individuals of a particular species, but the effect of a single fire is not as environmentally significant as a change to the fire regime. Some tree and shrub species recover very quickly and take over the forests and replace many rare species, which takes a long time to recover, but by then already their place is taken over by other vegetation, leaving them little room and less resources. Reasons of forest fire: the change in climatic conditions such as rising temperature, wind speed and direction, level of moisture in soil and atmosphere, and duration of dry spells cause wildfires. Other natural causes are the friction of bamboos swaying due to high wind velocity, lightning strike, global warming, and rising instances of El Niño. These all factors have cumulative effect on rising temperature, change in precipitation patterns, the air moisture, increasing heat waves, and drier soil, etc. On the other hand, man-made factors include small fires by grazers and gatherers, shifting cultivation, tourist bonfire, and timber mafia. Forest dwellers set fire to forests to clear walking paths, to collect non-timber forest products like gooseberry and magnolia flowers, and to encourage the fresh growth of grass for their livestock, and sometimes as a part of ritual practice. Agriculturists set fire to hill forests so that the fertilizing ash from fire washes down to their fields with a monsoon rains. For the forest dweller, therefore, fires have cultural and livelihood significance. GS score 24 hints. Environment and disaster management. How to prevent major fires. Prevention of human-caused fires through education and environmental modification. It will include silvicultural activities, engineering works, people participation, and education and enforcement. It is proposed that more emphasis be given to people participation through joint forest fire management for fire prevention. Improved wind models. The most dangerous types of wildfires often occur during what scientists call extreme fire weather, when conditions are hot, dry, and windy. The model helps in providing a snapshot of the fire's potential and thereby help in channeling and blocking the wind speed and direction, thereby restricting the progress of forest fires. Firing out. Firing out is a technique when firefighters create a controlled burn to direct the fire's spread. In this technique, the fire is created between the wildfire and a natural barrier, such as a road, to remove any vegetation in the wildfire's path. Prompt detection of fires through a well-coordinated network of observation points, efficient ground patrolling, and communication networks. Mapping the vulnerable areas and strengthen early warning systems and methods to control fire based on remote sensing technology and community participation. Also, awareness should be created about causes and impacts of fire on forests and local livelihoods. For successful fire management and administration, the National Fire Danger Rating System (NFDRs) and Fire Forecasting System are to be developed in the country. With changes in climate and land use, fire is increasingly being viewed as a major threat to many forests and their biodiversity. Rising intensity and frequency of forest fires and their spread is resulting in substantial loss of forest functions and related ecosystem services every year. Due to severe droughts, temperate broadleaf forests, subalpine conifer forests, wet evergreen forests, and others have now become susceptible to forest fires. Adequate measures should be taken to safeguard ecosystems, like mapping the vulnerable areas and develop and strengthen early warning systems and methods to control fire based on remote sensing technology and community participation. Instead of viewing forest fires as being purely destructive in nature, Forest managers should perhaps expand their worldview and be more inclusive to information from ecological and local knowledge systems that viewed fires as being both rejuvenating and revitalizing. In order to ensure no major fire take place, preventive measures should be taken. Associated concepts. Causes of forest fire. Forest fires are caused by natural causes as well as man-made causes. Natural causes. Many forest fires start from natural causes such as lightning, which set trees on fire. However, rain extinguishes such fires without causing much damage. High atmospheric temperatures and dry and low humidity offer favorable circumstance for a fire to start. Man-made causes. Fire is caused when a source of fire like naked flame, cigarette or body, electric spark or any source of ignition comes into contact with inflammable material. Traditionally, Indian forests have been affected by fires. The menace has been aggravated with rising human and cattle population and the consequent increase in demand for forest products by individuals and communities. Causes of forest fires can be divided into two broad categories: environmental, which are beyond control, and human-related, which are controllable. GS scored. Hints: Environment and Disaster Management 25. Environmental causes are largely related to climatic conditions such as temperature, wind speed and direction, level of moisture in soil and atmosphere, and duration of dry spells. Other natural causes are the friction of bamboos swaying due to high wind velocity and rolling stones that result in sparks setting off fires and highly inflammable leaf litter on the forest floor. Human-related causes result from human activity as well as methods of forest management. These can be intentional or unintentional. For example, grazers and gatherers of various forest products starting small fires to obtain good grazing grass, as well as to facilitate gathering of minor forest produce like flowers of Methuga indica and leaves of Iospyros melanopsilon. The centuries-old practice of shifting cultivation, especially in the northeastern region of India and in parts of the states of Orissa and Andhra Pradesh. The use of fires by villagers to ward off wild animals. Fires lit intentionally by people living around forests for recreation. Fires started accidentally by careless visitors to forests who discard cigarette butts. The causes of forest fire have been increasing rapidly. The problem has been accentuated by the growing human and cattle population. People enter forests ever more frequently to graze cattle, collect fuel wood, timber, and other minor forest produce. It has been estimated that 90% of forest fires in India are man-made. Classification of forest fire. Forest fire can broadly be classified into three categories: natural or controlled forest fire. Forest fires caused by heat generated in the litter and other biomes in summer through carelessness of people, human neglect, and forest fires purposely caused by local inhabitants. Types of forest fire. There are two types of forest fire: surface fire and crown fire. Surface fire. The forest fire may burn primarily as a surface fire, spreading along the ground as the surface litter senescent leaves and twigs and dry grasses, etc. on the forest floor, and is engulfed by the spreading flames. Crown fire. The other type of forest fire is a crown fire, in which the crown of trees and shrubs burn, often sustained by a surface fire. A crown fire is particularly very dangerous in a coniferous forest because resinous material given off burning logs burn furiously. On hill slopes, if the fire starts downhill, it spreads up fast as heat air adjacent to a slope tends to flow up the slope, spreading flames along with it. If the fire starts uphill, there is less likelihood of it spreading downwards. GS scored. 26 hints. Environment and disaster management. 17. The increasing industrialization increases the risk of industrial disasters. What effective steps must be taken to reduce industrial disasters? What lessons India can learn from its past experience in tackling such disasters? Hints. Industrial hazards are threats to people and life support systems that arise from the mass production of goods and services. When these threats exceed human coping capabilities or the absorptive capacities of environmental systems, they give rise to industrial disasters. Industrial hazards can occur at any stage in the production process, including extraction, processing, manufacture, transportation, storage, use, and disposal. Losses generally involve the release of damaging substances, e.g. chemicals, radioactivity, and genetic materials or damaging levels of energy from industrial facilities or equipment into surrounding environments. This usually occurs in the form of explosions, fires, spills, leaks, or wastes. Some examples of industrial disasters in India are Bhopal gas leak, 1984 Uphair cinema fire, 1997 Jaipur oil depot fire, 2009 Almaty mine collapse. 2017 industrial disaster can occur because of process and safety system failure, natural calamities, e.g. in Fukushima terrorist attack or sabotage. What effective steps must be taken to tackle such disasters? Effective steps against such disasters will include all the steps under the preventive, preparedness, mitigation, rescue, relief categories of disaster. These include classification of vulnerabilities on severity grade and then zonation of the industries, eliminating or reducing the use of toxics, identifying suitable locations which are secured, free from vulnerabilities from natural factors like earthquake proneness, tsunami, floods, etc. Implementation of land use restrictions, use of buffer zones to isolate potential sites and human habitations, implementation of risk management programs to minimizing opportunities for release to occur and mitigation of any release at source. The rapid, timely and qualified emergency response capacity to control and reduce the quantity of hazardous chemicals leaked and to reduce the duration of such a leak. Establish plans, develop public warning systems, and conduct public outreach and training on evacuation and shelter-in-place actions. Indian government has been on a learning curve after facing many industrial disasters and come out with various laws, rules and guidelines to tackle such disasters. GS scored. Hints, Environment and Disaster Management 27. Bhopal gas leak forced government to amend the Factories Act to include the people living in the vicinity to be part of risk proneness, which otherwise was only related to factory workers. Concept of absolute liability in which company has to pay the whole compensation was introduced. Later on, NDMA has come out with detailed guidelines and plans to tackle such disasters. In addition, the Hazardous Wastes Management, Handling and Transboundary Movement Rules, 2008, provide for means of safe storage and disposal of hazardous waste, which is listed in its schedules with the help of central and state pollution control boards and various other rules. In addition, the Hazardous Wastes Management, Handling and Transboundary Movement Rules, 2008, provide for means of safe storage and disposal of hazardous waste, which is listed in its schedules with the help of central and state pollution control boards, etc. Problems. Though India has prepared a number of laws, rules and guidelines, the main issues of their implementation, many of these are not regularly updated to match the current requirements. For example, the Environment Protection Act, 1986, also has provisions for management of hazardous waste, but the rules were last amended in 2010. Awareness about the disaster response is not with the public and local authorities, who are the first respondent. The issues of sufficient compensation, proper monitoring of the rescue and relief operations also remain. Therefore, it can be said that though India has learned a number of lessons, but still a lot needs to be done to efficiently tackle such disasters. 18. Sendai Framework adopted during 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Japanese city of Sendai is the first major UN agreement on the post-2015 development agenda. In this regard, discuss India's post-Sendai initiatives. Hints. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by UNGA in 2015 embedded disaster risk management in 8 out of 17 SDGs, which highlight the significance of disaster preparedness. After it, Sendai Framework was adopted during the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. It consists of 4 major priority areas and 7 targets to be met by 2030, which is to prevent creation of new disaster risks and also to substantially reduce disaster risks. The 4 priority areas include understanding risk, strengthening risk governance, investing in disaster resilience, improving capacities for disaster response. On these lines, India also charted out its initiatives to tackle the disasters in an effective way. These include: India has successfully hosted the Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction (AMCDR) and adopted New Delhi Declaration and Regional Action Plan for implementation of the Sendai Framework. The conference also commemorated the first World Tsunami Awareness Day to spread awareness on tsunami. Outcomes of the AMCDR will guide the implementation of the Sendai framework in Asia and the Pacific. National Disaster Response Force (NDRF) is strengthened in terms of state-of-the-art training and equipment. Government has approved the creation of National Disaster Response Reserve (NDRR) through a revolving fund of Rs. 250 crores to be operated by the NDRF. GS score 28 hints. Environment and Disaster Management. The government expressed to share India's expertise and help other countries in disaster response as it did during Japan earthquake in 2011 and Nepal earthquake in 2015. The government is making efforts to promote regional cooperation by hosting the SAARC Disaster Management Center to reduce disaster risks in the region and promoting knowledge sharing among the SAARC countries. In an effort to augment capacity building, National Institute of Disaster Management (NIDM) has signed a MOU with Jawaharlal Nehru University JNU for financial assistance and academic cooperation for establishment of a Center for Excellence in Disaster Research and Resilience Building at JNU. The government has implemented the recommendations of 14th Finance Commission and allocated funds towards the State Disaster Response Fund (SDRF). However, several issues which need to be addressed include establishment of National Disaster Mitigation Fund, development of communication systems including satellite-based communication network for disaster management, binding guideline to states for disaster preparations, cutting-edge technology, equipment and training to NDRF personnel. Overall, India is on the path of development of comprehensive disaster management systems which need to reinforce by political will and administrative commitment. The Sendai framework has re-emphasized that the state has the primary role in reducing the disaster risk. It also calls upon private sector to be involved in disaster preparedness and mitigation. The associated concept Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The Sendai Framework is a 15-year, voluntary, non-binding agreement which recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders including local government, the private sector and other stakeholders. It aims for the following outcome: the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods and health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. The Sendai Framework is the successor instrument to the Hyogo Framework for Action HFA 2005-2015, Building the Resilience of Nations and Communities to Disasters. It is the outcome of stakeholder consultations initiated in March 2012 and intergovernmental negotiations held from July 2014 to March 2015, which were supported by the UNISDR upon the request of the General Assembly. UNISDR has been tasked to support the implementation, follow-up and review of the Sendai Framework. The 7 global targets, they substantially reduce global disaster mortality by 2030, aiming to lower average per 100,000 global mortality rates in the decade 2020 to 2030 compared to the period 2005 to 2015. We substantially reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030, aiming to lower average global figure per 100,000 in the decade 2020 negative 2030 compared to the period 2005 to 2015. C. Reduce direct disaster economic loss in relation to global gross domestic product (GDP) by 2030. D. Substantially reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, among them health and educational facilities, including through developing their resilience by 2030. GS score. Hints, Environment and Disaster Management 29. E. Substantially increase the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2020. F. Substantially enhance international cooperation to developing countries through adequate and sustainable support to complement their national actions for implementation of this framework by 2030. G. Substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments to the people by 2030. The 4 priorities for action. Priority 1. Understanding disaster risk. Disaster risk management should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, exposure of persons and assets, hazard characteristics and the environment. Such knowledge can be used for risk assessment, prevention, mitigation, preparedness and response. Priority 2. Strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Disaster risk governance at a national, regional and global levels is very important for prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and rehabilitation. It fosters collaboration and partnership. Priority 3. Investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. Public and private investment in disaster risk prevention and reduction through structural and non-structural measures are essential to enhance the economic, social, health and cultural resilience of persons, communities, countries and their assets, as well as the environment. Priority 4. Enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. The growth of disaster risk means there is a need to strengthen disaster preparedness for response, take action in anticipation of events, and ensure capacities are in place for effective response and recovery at all levels. The recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction phase are a critical opportunity to build back better, including through integrating disaster risk reduction into development measures. 19. Elaborate on the ill effects of coastal pollution and coastal interference due to developmental activities and urbanization. Discuss how to mitigate such effects and examine the role of coastal regulatory zone in this regard. Hints: coastal areas have been regions rich in various resources, support rich biodiversity and thus have played an important role in the life of human beings and nations by helping them in achieving economic growth, food security, etc. However, too much focus on economic aspects and increased urbanization along the coasts have resulted into neglect of ecological aspects, which is impacting the sustainability of the overall ecosystem through introduction of harmful and poisonous substances. These pollutants impact the biodiversity in the oceans, especially coastal areas, threatening the overall ecosystem through various processes like eutrophication, increased biological oxygen demand, increased toxicity levels, and resulting into loss of ecosystem services like the overall food security of the country can suffer if the fishery production in the coastal regions declines due to overexploitation or changes in ocean temperatures. GS scored 30 hints. Environment and disaster management. Aesthetic services and associated tourism industry of the country can decline due to loss of coral reefs resulting from too much sediment flowing from deforestation. Loss of animal and plant life as experienced in Sundarbans region due to reduced flow of sediments in Congo. Climate change and associated phenomena like ocean acidification, ocean temperature rise can result into harmful algal blooms, coral bleaching, change in habitats of various species. Disasters. Seawater rise because of climate change can cause flood, health disasters in urban areas along the coasts, and greater destruction due to catastrophic events like tsunami, storm surges because of mangroves destruction. Economic and livelihood services offered by oceans can suffer because of all these. As developing countries like India plans to embark on the coastal development with special focus on fisheries, this can be disastrous. Adverse health impacts because of bioaccumulation and biomagnification of toxic substances through food chains. Seafood and salt made from seawater is proving harmful to body. Steps need to be taken to mitigate these. There is need to strictly enforce international conventions like the ARPOL Convention, Blast Water Management and Control Convention 2004, Protocol to the Convention on Prevention Non-Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matters 1996. OPR, CHMS, etc. to ensure minimum negative impacts. Need to focus specific areas like microplastics production, strict enforcement of environment regulations for industries. All these require strengthening of Central Pollution Control Board and respective state pollution control boards. Control over the deforestation along coastal areas. Efficient sewage treatment plants along the coastal towns through AMRUD, smart cities, and efficient use of soil nutrients through schemes like Soil Health Card, etc. Role of Coastal Regulatory Zone. Coastal Regulatory Zone can play very efficient role in mitigating the coastal pollution and degradation if enforced strictly, as it regulates the activities allowed in particular zones by excluding ecologically destructive activities in most vulnerable zones and gradual relaxation of restrictions based on vulnerabilities. Various initiatives to combat pollution under CRZ 2011 have been taken in past and continue to be taken. All coastal states are required to ensure that the existing practice of discharging untreated waste and effluents is phased out within a period not exceeding 2 years. Dumping of solid waste is phased out within 1 year from the commencement of the notification. An action plan is to prepare for dealing with pollution in coastal areas and waters and in the time-bound manner. GS scored. Hints, Environment and Disaster Management 31. The action plan is submitted to MOF, who would provide technical and financial assistance. However, there is poor implementation of CRZ regulations, as has been seen during relaxations given for various projects like Statue of Liberty and recommendations of Sheleshniak Committee on relaxing the overall norms. In view of the great importance of coastal areas for human development, there is a need to focus on the sustainability aspect of activities impacting coastal environments through CRZ or other initiatives. The associated concepts eutrophication is the increased load of nutrients to estuaries and coastal waters. Harmful algal blooms, dead zones, and fish kills are the results of a process called eutrophication. The primary culprits in eutrophication appear to be excess nitrogen and phosphorus from sources including fertilizer runoff and septic system effluent to atmospheric fallout from burning fossil fuels, which enter water bodies and fuel the overgrowth of algae, which, in turn, reduces water quality and degrades estuarine and coastal ecosystems. Industrial waste like chemical runoff from industry, toxins, hot and contaminated water from nuclear power plants situated along the coasts results into changes in the physical and chemical properties of water and ocean biodiversity. Microplastics. Microplastics are small plastic pieces less than 5 millimeters long which can be harmful to our ocean aquatic life. Ocean acidification refers to a reduction in the pH of the ocean over an extended period of time, caused primarily by uptake of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the atmosphere. When CO2 is absorbed by seawater, a series of chemical reactions occur resulting in the increased concentration of hydrogen ions. This increase causes the seawater to become more acidic and causes carbonate ions to be relatively less abundant. Carbonate ions are an important building block of structures such as seashells and coral skeletons. Decreases in carbonate ions can make building and maintaining shells and other calcium carbonate structures difficult for calcifying organisms such as oysters, clams, sea urchins, shallow water corals, deep sea corals, and calcareous plankton. CRZ was notified in 2011 with the objective of protection of livelihoods of traditional fisherfolk communities, preservation of coastal ecology, promotion of economic activity that have necessarily to be located in coastal regions. It divides the whole coastal areas into various zones. CRZ1. These are ecologically sensitive areas. These are essential in maintaining the ecosystem of the coast. They lie between low and high tide line. Exploration of natural gas and extraction of salt are permitted. CRZ2. These areas form up to the shoreline of the coast. Unauthorized structures are not allowed to construct in this zone. CRZ3. Rural and urban localities which fall outside the 1 and 2. Only certain activities related to agriculture, even some public facilities, are allowed in this zone. CRZ4. This lies in the aquatic area up to territorial limits. Fishing and allied activities are permitted in this zone. Solid waste should be let off in this zone. GS scored. 32 hints. Environment and disaster management. 20. Identify the major reasons for biodiversity erosion in the country and examine a role of National Biodiversity Action Plan in containing the effects. Hints. With only 2.4% of the world's land area, India's share of the global species diversity is an impressive 8.1% spread along different habitats like forests, grassland, wetlands, coastal and marine ecosystems, and desert ecosystems. However, this biodiversity has been constantly under threat from unsustainable development activities resulting into loss of biodiversity. Various reasons for the loss of biodiversity in India can be identified, and proper efforts can be made to tackle them. The main reasons are economic development and associated loss, destruction of habitat fragmentation because of large infrastructural projects, rising population and encroachment on the forest areas for agriculture, urbanization, environment pollution in form of water pollution, marine pollution, land degradation has resulted into decline of certain species like gangs, dolphin, gharial, etc. Hunting, exploitation of selected species because of their high economic value. Collection for zoo and research, faulty governance and management practices. poor governance in which the local people were excluded from the biodiversity management, which should have been a participatory process, resulting into neglect of traditional knowledge. The businessman official nexus has created a situation where those authorized to protect are found involved in trafficking of wild animals. Low scientific understanding of ecosystem functioning has resulted into introduction of exotic species or neglect of certain critical components of ecosystem which impact the biodiversity. Natural calamities like forest fires, floods and threat from climate change lacks international regulations for their poor enforcement results into the trafficking of the animals or their body parts. Striking right balance between the developmental process and environment has been a major problem faced by the policy planners. The National Biodiversity Action Plan of 2013 has been part of that process. Various initiatives part of this process taken in recent various efforts like National Biodiversity Awards, marking of eco-sensitive zones, various operations like Operation Thunderbird of Interpol in coordination with Wildlife Crime Control Bureau WCCB Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change brought about awareness among the enforcement agencies to focus on the existing trade routes and major trade hubs in the country. Species-specific efforts like Operation Corma for turtles, revised guidelines on CAMPA to facilitate better afforestation and prevention of habitat fragmentation. GS scored. Hints, Environment and Disaster Management 33. International cooperation to ensure habitat connectivity has been taken, e.g. transboundary monas, conservation area, etc. Initiatives like BioFin to mobilize resources for biodiversity conservation has been taken. Despite these efforts, the proper understanding of the biodiversity services and their importance is lacking, which is reflected in threat to biodiversity in different parts of country, e.g. St. Deer is facing existential threat. Government has significantly reduced the Western Ghats CSZ against original proposal. Therefore, there is need to mainstream biodiversity concerns in the development planning and create awareness about different biodiversity services human beings enjoy and finding their present market values. Steps like green budgeting are the need of the hour. Associated Concepts National Biodiversity Action Plan of 2013 strengthening and integration of in-situ, on-farm and ex-situ conservation, augmentation of natural resource base and its sustainable utilization, ensuring inter- and intragenerational equity, regulation of introduction of invasive alien species and their management, assessment of vulnerability and adaptation to climate change, and a certification integration of biodiversity concerns in economic and social development to prevent, minimize and abate impacts of pollution, development and integration of biodiversity databases, strengthening implementation of policy, legislative and administrative measures for biodiversity conservation and management, building of national capacities for biodiversity conservation and appropriate use of new technologies, valuation of goods and services provided by biodiversity and use of economic instruments in the decision-making processes, international cooperation to consolidate and strengthen bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation on issues related to biodiversity.